Gore House was a stately and charming mansion which once stood in what is now a public park in Sittingbourne. The house itself has long since been demolished, and only the stable block and the bases of the pillars of the portico remain today. A farmhouse had stood on the site for centuries, since John Gore owned it in the early 14th century. Gore means a wedge-shaped piece of land. By 1760 it was a substantial brick-built farmhouse with 6 bedrooms, central chimney and latticed windows, with a yard, barn and outbuildings. In 1791 the old farmhouse was demolished by the new owner of the estate, Colonel Gabriel Harper, who had made a fortune in India in the East India Company Army. Harper had an elegant mansion in the classical style built on the site. The architect was Samuel Pepys Cockerell. The house faced south and was handsome, with a portico supported by Ionic columns. There was a central hall with butlers' and housekeepers' rooms to the left and the staircase on the right. The main rooms were at the back of the house and consisted of an eating parlour, breakfast parlour, drawing room and conservatory. Colonel Harper did not have much time to enjoy this house, as he died in 1800, his wife selling the mansion to Andrew Hawes Bradley. The memorial plaque to Hawes Bradley in Tunstall Church describes him as active and impartial in his public station of magistrate, liberal and kind in the private relations of parent, landlord and neighbour. Andrew died in the early 1820s, and his son Frank Bradley Dine and his wife Mary, who was the daughter of Lord Harris of Belmont, Faversham, were the next occupants of the house. The family were looked after by 7 live-in servants. Like his father, Frank was also a magistrate and for a time Lord Lieutenant of Kent. A bit of a hardliner to modernise in his dealing with the swing riots and advocating man-traps in some situations. In 1837 the Gore Cricket Club was formed. Though a team may well have played regularly before then, the team played weekly in the park. When Frank Bradley Dine died in 1853, the mansion was auctioned off. It was described as being surrounded by ornamental pleasure grounds and shrubberies, 2 walled gardens, a barn, cowsheds, stabling for 4 cart horses, 10 carriage and riding horses and 2 coach houses with coachmen's rooms and lofts above. Over 100 acres of fertile land came with the property, and this was generally leased out to local farmers. George Smeed, a self-made businessman of enormous wealth, bought the estate. His money had come from brickmaking, and he estimated that his firm had made enough bricks to circle the world with a wall 6 feet high. He owned a fleet of over 70 sailing barges, many of them built in his own shipyard on Milton Creek. He was seen as upsetting the existing social order. Once a year he invited the inmates of Milton Workhouse for a day out in the grounds at Gore Court. They arrived in wagons and were treated to a substantial tea, tobacco and a pint of ale in tents in the park, whilst a band played. These occasions developed into vastly popular Whitsun bank holiday fetes. 8,000 people came in 1879, when attractions included a steam roundabout. George's first wife died in 1867, but by 1871 Smeed had then married widow Martha Greenstead. The indoor servants now consisted of a governess, 2 housemaids, a lady's maid and a kitchen maid. After Smeed's death in 1881, the estate was sold to a local farmer, but the house was leased to the Reverend Allen, who set up a select preparatory boarding school there. In 1892 the property was again for sale. The auction brochure maps show 2 carriage drives led to the house, and they are now Park Avenue and Park Drive. The school continued, and in 1901, under headmaster Arthur Gordon, 21 boys were boarding at the school, looked after by a cook and 7 maids. More staff lived in the cottages beside the house. There was an open-air swimming pool for the boys, who came from as far away as India, where their fathers served the empire. In 1902, the De Winton brothers took over the school. Arthur Travers Harris was a pupil here. He became famous later on as Bomber Harris during World War II, when he led Bomber Command of the RAF. The park continued to be used for grand public fetes, athletics events and celebrations. At the Whitsun Fete in 1901, 13,000 people paid the admission charge. Sittingbourne's celebrations of the coronation of King George V in 1911 took place in the park. A procession of over 2,000 children marched up Gore Court Road that June day. In the park, roundabouts and swings had been set up for them, and there was a marquee where the teas were served. When the First World War broke out, the school had already closed down and the house stood empty. It was requisitioned by the Ministry for War as a training camp. The 4th and 5th Battalions of the Royal Dublin Fusiliers arrived in 1914. The 5th Battalion left after 11 months in September 1915, and the 4th Battalion left in January 1916. The headquarters of the permanent staff were billeted in the house, whilst the troops were in tents in the park around it. The young Irish soldiers were popular in the town, as were the regimental band concerts on summer evenings. By May 1916, the 3rd Battalion of the Queen's Regiment, the Royal West Surrey, under the command of Lieutenant Colonel A.G. Shaw, arrived to take the place of the 4th Royal Dublin Fusiliers, who had been posted to France. The Queen's Band continued the tradition of playing in the park on Sunday mornings after church parade, and soon the men of the battalion were holding their regimental sports meetings at Gore Court, watched by many of the people of Sittingbourne. Gradually, the post of the white-painted 5-barred gate at the end of the main drive, which led to the house, became covered with the signatures of the soldiers who stayed at the camp. These remained visible for many years, long after many of the young men who wrote them were killed in battle. By the end of the war, the house was in a bad way, and with its remaining land it was auctioned off in 1921, and the house was demolished in 1926. The road frontages were opened up for building. The ancient avenue of trees which lined the drive was chopped down to make a wider road. The new houses, mostly semi-detached, sold for about £500 each. The parkland was used for grazing. The columns of the portico continued to stand for some years after the house was demolished. Some of the houses in Park Drive were built over the foundations of the mansion, but occasionally the old Tudor house makes itself felt. In recent years, an old brick floor was found under concrete in one of the gardens. It's likely to have been the kitchen floor of the old house. In 1936, Sittingbourne Council purchased about 14 acres of the parkland, including the stable block and cottage. Its preservation as a public park is ensured as a King George's Field under the National Memorial to King George V. By 1946, nearly 500 King George's Fields had been created across the country, but Gore Court was the first to open in Kent. The park was opened with a flourish in October 1937 by Lord Harris, watched by several hundred spectators. He unveiled the heraldic panels on the Park Avenue entrance and unlocked the gates with a special key. A plaque was fixed to the building which had been a stable and coach house and was now to be a sports pavilion, which explained that the council had converted it into a sports pavilion, retaining the original elevation. Another plaque on the same building commemorates the opening of this beautiful park. The council had laid out the park with a section for children which included a sandpit in the old swimming pool, and swings and a seesaw. The larger adult section included football and hockey pitches. Old trees that remained were cared for, and a new avenue of pink and white chestnut trees was planted. and much of this remains for us to enjoy today. A visitor to King George's Field today can reflect on how the park has been shaped by the estate of the past and gain some insight into the naming of some of the roads in the area. Park Avenue, Park Drive, Bradley Drive, Gore Court Road and Park Road. If you'd like a little more detail about the history of the house and the estate, have a look at this book, which is available from the museum's website. If you have found this video interesting, please subscribe to our YouTube channel or visit our website.